Thank you all for being here today. My name is Maria Galindo. I am Director General for Digital Nation and Urban Agenda at the Government of Catalonia. As you may know, this is the third of a series of 4 digital rights live sessions from Catalonia that we want to share with all of you and with the world. Why this series? Well, the Government of Catalonia coordinates the development of a Charter of Digital Rights and Responsibilities. And this is an open innovation project in constant construction, to which people from a wide variety of social sectors have contributed. And well, the Digital Rights Charter aims to promote a legislative and democratic framework to guarantee human rights in the digital age. And I think that Arnau is going to share, yes, the link to the charter in the chat for everyone that wants to also contribute in this live project. At the end of 2019, the Parliament of Catalonia expressed its widespread support for the charter. And with this, we aim to contribute to the global debate on how to continue defending human rights, also, and now more importantly, in the digital age. The project includes proposals that can and should be addressed locally, but also highlights challenges that imply global governance at the Government of Catalonia, that the Government of Catalonia wants to help define from the experience with the Charter. We organized this series of conversations between speakers of local and international relevance around various areas of digital rights and responsibilities. With the first session, which was on digital rights and artificial intelligence, we had the opportunity to shed some light into the European Commission's proposal for a regulation on AI, artificial intelligence. 2 weeks ago, we had the second session about free access to knowledge and information as a human right, which is very important and so on the global agenda right now. It was a very rich discussion between Ms. Rebecca McKinnon, Vice President Global Advocacy at the Wikimedia Foundation, and Mr. Vicent Partal. He's Director of the Catalan digital newspaper VilaWeb and Chairman of the Board of Directors of the European Journalism Center. You will find the video to these sessions posted also on the series websites. So today's conversation will be on digital rights of children and adolescents. This is one of the specific perspectives being developed in the Charter of Digital Rights in Catalonia, and we will comment on that today. Just a quick reminder to everyone that after the discussion, we will open questions from the audience. So if you have any comment, question, anything that you want to share with us, feel free to write them in the chat. Or in the space that will be provided after the session. You can write in English, Catalan, Spanish, even French, I would say, Italian, or many other languages. We will try our best to translate and to have the conversation going. So let me introduce you our first speaker, Dr. Eva Lievens. Good morning, great pleasure to have you here today. Dr. Livens is an associate professor at the Faculty of Law and Criminology of the Gant University. She leads the research group on law and technology. She is a member of the Human Rights Center and a number of centers and organizations on digital rights, innovation, privacy, and digital innovation. Our recurrent focus in her research relates to the legal impact of the design and deployment of technology in today's society, human and children's rights in the digital environment, and the use of alternative regulatory instruments. 2 years ago, together with Ingrida Milkaite, she was awarded the Stefano Rodotà Award by the Council of Europe for their groundbreaking research into the children's right to privacy and data protection in the digital age. Congratulations and thank you for your work. Dr. Livens is a member of many committees and advisory boards on digital human rights, and she's advisor to Regina Jensdottir, coordinator of the rights of the child at the Council of Europe. Dr. Lievens, thank you so much for being here today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maria, for your very kind introduction and also for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here in this very interesting series that you're organizing. And I'm very happy that I can talk a little bit about some of the research that we have been doing on the rights of the child in the digital environment. I have a presentation, so I will start sharing my screen. I hope you can all see my presentation. Yes, I see people nodding. Okay, so today what I would like to do is to tell you a little bit more about some of the recent policy developments and policy priorities in relation to this very important issue of children growing up in a world that is permeated with technologies, with digital technologies. And to those children, that's the most normal thing. Many of these technologies provide children with enormous opportunities to learn, to play, to communicate. But of course, at the same time, these technologies also present risks. And sometimes it is very hard to predict the impact of those risks in the long term. What you see on the slides are a few examples of how children engage with technology. I think we all know and realize that, especially during the past 2 years, I would say, during the COVID-19 pandemic, for many children, technology has really been a lifeline. Children have sometimes in times of lockdown, technology, the internet, mobile apps were the only way for them to communicate with their friends, to learn, to be in contact with the school and teachers. So technology has been really important to them. At the same time, we have also seen that, for instance, because of the high presence in the online environment, online child sexual exploitation has also increased. So always these both sides of the coin. Another example, TikTok, a really popular app for many children all around the world. It allows them to be really creative, to invent little dances, to engage in challenges with their friends. But at the same time, we also know that there is content that we might think could be harmful to them. Content about self-harm, content about body shaming, for instance. Also in relation to other social media platforms such as Facebook, we know that there are some issues. If you think back to the testimonies by Frances Haugen a few weeks ago, the risks to children were very prominent in her testimony. On the right hand side of the screen, the bottom, you see also references to play. A lot of children play online, engage in games, and really have a very fun time and can also learn a lot. They can also play together with friends in multiplayer games, which again in the COVID-19 pandemic really allowed them to be in contact with each other. However, what we also see is that this gaming environment is increasingly monetized. You can buy a lot of in-game items, and especially to children, it's not always clear that this is actually real money that is being spent, or in other cases, their personal data is used as a form of payment to know a lot more about them, and also, for instance, personalize the games to make sure that they spend more time and more money in this gaming environment. A last example relates to biometrics. For instance, technologies such as facial recognition. They can be really useful, for instance, to look for and identify missing children. This has already been deployed with success. But at the same time, there is also great concern about the application of such biometric technologies in other contexts. For instance, a few weeks ago, there was this news item that in the UK, facial recognition was going to be used in the lunchroom at schools. in order to pay for school lunches, facial recognition would be used. And the argument was that the queue would then go faster, children would not have to wait too long, but a lot of protests has risen with respect to this initiative, because this is really a very intrusive technology that is being used for a purpose that is maybe not that appropriate. So this is really something that I think is important to acknowledge. I think the benefits and the opportunities of technologies really outweigh the risks, but we also need to be aware of the risks. And we need to take into account that for many of these technologies, they are not that old yet, and we don't know yet how this will impact children's development, children who really grow up with these technologies from birth onwards. And it has increasingly been recognized and also at different policy levels that the deployment of these technologies, digital services, platforms on which children are active, that this can and really does have an impact on a number of children's rights. And what you see on the screen is a selection of rights from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. This is one of the most ratified conventions in the world. It dates from 1989, which is of course a time in which technologies were not that present yet in the lives of children, but the convention remains as important today as it was at that time. And you can see, for instance, what we talked about, the social media platforms where children can express themselves. Of course, this is very beneficial for instance, their right to freedom of expression. And also the right to play that is guaranteed by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child is something that can really be advanced by these technologies. At the same time, there are also rights that are really at risk or at stake. For instance, the right to privacy and the right to data protection. I will speak a little bit more about it later in the presentation. And increasingly, we also see that scholars warn for risks to the right to protection from commercial exploitation. This right has traditionally been linked to child labor, but more and more we are thinking that digital child labor might also really be something that we need to pay attention to. For instance, child influencers who are really under pressure to perform online, to keep posting videos, also because sometimes there is a commercial actor who is pressuring them to do so. So all the rights that you see on the screen can in some way be affected by the use of technology, either positively or negatively. And in the corners of the screen, you see the 4 fundamental children's rights principles that always need to be observed. So these are also principles that we need to take into account at all times when we think about technology. The principle of non-discrimination, again, a lot of concerns, for instance, about bias in algorithms, bias in artificial intelligence systems. And so this is something that we also need to be aware of. The best interests of the child. And this is really one of the fundamental principles. Whenever we make decisions about digital technologies, the child's best interests must always be a primary consideration. And something that I will also tell you a little bit more about, the child's right to be heard, is also really something that needs to be taken into account. Children's views must be taken into account. We must listen to children and also give their views and their experiences the weight that they deserve. What I have been telling you now about this impact on children's rights, this has been acknowledged by different organizations at the international level, at the European level. So what we have seen over the past years really is a development and adoption of important policy documents that discuss this issue of children's rights in the digital environment. This has happened at the level of the United Nations, at the level of the OECD, at the level of the Council of Europe, and also at the level of the European Union. So we really see that this is an issue that policymakers are paying attention to, and so this is also very much in line with what is happening with your digital charter on rights and responsibilities, I think. Just a few words about these documents. As you mentioned, Maria, I had the pleasure to be involved in the work of the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe actually was one of the first organizations to pay significant attention to this issue. And so in 2018, the Committee of Ministers adopted a very important recommendation on guidelines to respect, protect, and fulfill the rights of the child in the digital environment. And this document really listed these important benefits and risks that that are related to the rights of the child, also presented some actions, also emphasized the importance of coordination at the national level to make sure that policies that are adopted to increase the opportunities and decrease the risks could happen in a coordinated, uniform way. Another important document, I think, probably the most important at the level of international organizations, was the adoption of the General Comment number 25 by the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child. Again, a very comprehensive document that really aimed to interpret this United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child that dates from 1989 and interpreted really in light of these technological developments that affect children in their daily lives. The European Commission has adopted a new strategy on the rights of the child in March of this year. So this is also a very recent development. And there as well, one of the important pillars of that strategy relates to the digital and information society. So this is also a policy priority at the level of the European Union. And then most recently, the OECD also adopted a new recommendation on the rights of the child in a digital environment. They had a recommendation that dated from 2012, and this was also adapted and updated to make sure that the challenges that have arisen over the past few years were taken into account. So in all these documents, there is this idea that we need to increase the benefits for children of technology and decrease the risks. And we need to have strong policies. We need to have strong legislative frameworks that make sure that the rights of children are guaranteed. And so this brings me to your charter, the Charter for Digital Rights and Responsibilities from Catalonia. I was very interested to learn about the work that you have been doing. And I had a look at the charter, and of course I noticed the reference to children and young people under this heading of training and digital inclusion. And this is really something that we also see in these international and European documents, the importance of training, educating, empowering children, making sure that there are digital literacy programs, because this gives them more understanding of this technological world and these technological developments, and make sure that they can build resilience. But what I would like to do in the next few minutes is focus on 3 other parts of this charter. And that is the part on multi-stakeholderism, the part on data protection and information privacy, and then the part on artificial intelligence. And I would just like to frame these topics a little bit in light of those international documents, so those policy documents, to see what these documents say about the particular topics that are also part of this charter. So multi-stakeholderism, I think this is really a concept that has been firmly at the center of policy debates since the emergence of the internet. The internet and the online environment is not something that can only be controlled or regulated by governments. Other actors need to be involved, and this is also very much emphasized in the documents that I just introduced. So the general comment, number 25, really puts emphasis on cooperation with civil society, but especially also businesses. Many of those apps, of those platforms, are run by commercial actors who have specific purposes in mind. Sometimes their platforms are not really meant to be used by children, but children use them anyway. So this also puts responsibilities on their shoulders. And this is very much acknowledged in these documents. Another actor that really needs to be part of this multi-stakeholderism are the children themselves. I think the right to be heard is extremely important, and we still do not listen enough to children. I think if we listen to them speak about how they experience technology, how they use certain apps, it will be much clearer how, as a government, as businesses, as civil society, we need to prioritize certain actions to make sure that risks are decreased and benefits are optimized. A few words about data protection and privacy. I think this is really an extremely important right in the digital environment, and a right that is often threatened. Although, as you see on the screen, both the UN and the Council of Europe emphasize the importance of this right, and also emphasize the importance of strong legislative frameworks, for instance, to guarantee that the processing of children's data by technologies is fair and lawful. An example of such a legislative instrument at the level of the EU is the General Data Protection Regulation. This is an instrument that has a lot of potential to make sure that all those organizations who process children's data do this in a responsible way. But unfortunately, what we see until this day is that although this instrument has a lot of potential, in practice, there are still a lot of problems. There are vague notions, there are a lot of difficulties regarding the implementation. The enforcement is weak. There are still very few decisions by data protection authorities to make sure that data controllers really treat children's data fairly. And also, again, there is not a lot of involvement by children. Children are not often heard. We do not often listen to children, how they experience privacy, how they want data processing to be regulated. This is something that we have tried to do in one of our research projects. We organized workshops with 83 children between the ages of 9 and 12 years old. We asked them about their online activities and how they perceive privacy and data protection online. And we also asked them how they want to be informed about the processing of their data. And this was so interesting. It was so interesting to hear them talk about how they perceive information to be private. They really focus on interpersonal privacy, so privacy vis-a-vis their parents, vis-a-vis their friends. They really deploy privacy management strategies, so they are aware of certain risks. For instance, they give false information, false addresses, because they know that this is something that should remain private. And they trust public actors quite strongly, but it was also very clear that about the commercial processing of data, their understanding was much more limited. So this is something I think that we need to focus on when we educate children about data processing. And their ideas about giving them information about data processing were so interesting. They especially emphasized that this should not be boring. They want animated videos. They want little games to learn about data processing. And they want this to be colorful, to have specific examples and a link to their day-to-day reality. And they also want to be involved in the designing of this information. So you see some pictures on the screen that they drew about this. Finally, a last very short word about artificial intelligence. I heard that you had a session about this topic in particular. I just want to say that I think when it comes to artificial intelligence, at this moment in time, we do not know what the impact can be of some of these very intrusive systems, profiling systems that put children in boxes from a very young age. I think it's very hard to predict the impact. So in all regulatory initiatives on this topic at the level of the Council of Europe, the level of the EU, I think we need to be careful and we need to pay attention that children are not forgotten. That when it comes to deploying such systems that may have an impact on children's rights, this really needs to be a priority for regulators to make sure that the risks that exist are decreased as much as possible. So a few takeaways. I think the way forward is true engagement with children. This is not always easy, but this does not mean that we don't have to do it. As policymakers, as companies, as researchers, we need to talk to children and listen to what they have to say. Multi-stakeholderism, I think it's inevitable, but it needs to be meaningful. So it means that, okay, governments need to set up dialogues with enterprises, with companies, but if something goes wrong, they also need to have strong legislative frameworks to intervene and to make sure that children's rights are guaranteed. And in all those actions, the best interest of the child must be the primary consideration. And if we don't know the impact of certain potentially harmful activities, the precautionary principle might lead us to take action to make sure that the child's rights are guaranteed in this very complex day and age. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lievens, for your presentation. So yes to technology, yes to the opportunities and benefits that technology and the digital age brings to children. Work all together in making also a policy priority to limit the risks that children face. Thank you so much. It is now the turn for our second speaker, Dr. Liliana Arroyo. Ms. Arroyo is a PhD in sociology. She's a specialist in digital social innovation. She's currently doing research in ESADE and consultancy on digital transformations for the common good, which sounds amazing. She participates regularly in non-academic spaces for knowledge transfer. Her first essay, Tu no ets la teva selfie, You're Not Your Selfie, explores the digital experiences of youth. Dr. Arroyo, it's so great to have you here. I've been following you and your work very closely, and we are so thrilled to have you here today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you everyone for having me here today. It's a pleasure to share this conversation with Eva Livens and all the insightful ideas that she has shared previously. I resonate with most of them, and in my intervention, I would like to cover two aspects. One is general comments about what is the context that we have and the challenges that we face, and on the other side, I would also share our experience with a pilot that we carried out in order to create the digital charter of rights for children and adolescents in Catalonia, which was basically based on focus group, and many of the conclusions are quite aligned with what Eva was sharing. I really resonate with the idea of the need to really make children engaged in these processes and their right to be heard. And this is something that we were having in mind from the very beginning when approaching the digital charter, so the Charter of the Digital Rights for Children, right? Because we tend to live in a very despotic and adult-centric worlds. We tend to underestimate their capacity to understand, to define, and also to advocate for their rights. And what I discovered in this focus group of the pilot, but also while conducting the research for my essay, You're Not Your Selfie, is that they are eager to be asked. They want to be heard, and when you ask them, it's like a really like an open space of communication is possible. So I'm really optimistic in this sense, and I also think, and I completely agree with Eva in this sense, that we really need strong legal frameworks. And by strong legal frameworks, we mean that these frameworks are comprehensive with opportunities and risks, both risks and opportunities, that they are strong in terms of implementation, in terms of enforcement, but most and foremost, I think that it's important that these legal frameworks are really well informed by research, by by all the data, quantitative and qualitative data that we are gathering from different stances of research, because I think that otherwise we are missing part of the picture. Because we tend to be really focused on risks or on aspects about educating, digital education related to screen time or to limited potentialities of these digital tools. And I think that we can be missing opportunities if we are not having our eyes wide open to all the potential opportunities that they have. But we also need these legal frameworks in order to ensure under which conditions these opportunities are possible. And how can we mitigate these risks? That being said, I would like to share some insights about our field work. As I said, we were putting in the center children and teenagers. We were interviewing, we were conducting 10 discussion groups, 10 focus groups with more than 100 participants across the country. It was only a pilot, but we had the opportunity to count with the interventions of 60% of children below 12 years old, so between 7 and 12 years old, and 40% of them were between 13 and 17, so almost reaching the legal age. As I said, we tried to make this representative, and as it was a pilot, it was not really covering the whole territory, but we did a very intense effort in order to also capture vulnerable, so children that were living in vulnerable situation, which is related to digital divide, but also lack of digital literacy in their families and their environments, which is a critical factor. And basically with them, with what we discussed, it was about 3 aspects that we think that are really, really important in their digital experience. And the first aspect was identity. So how do you build, maintain, and recognize your identity and others' identities, if you're using nicknames or not, if you are cheating on your age, if you are aware that you have parental control tools and so on. So everything related to identity. The second matter of discussion was relationships, so the connections, the capacity to communicate, the need to play, affective relations, the right to have digital friends that you don't know in face-to-face settings, or even the right to disconnect and the right to forget, the right to oblivion. This is something that we also discuss with them. And last but not least, the support that they give. So the training they give, and also the mentorship that they are providing to each other, and also coming from adults, and their capacity to solve problems in case they are facing difficult situations, right? Or the right to ask help, which is another aspect which I've personally found it's really, really, really critical. So the big trends that we found is basically that for them, having a digital identity, it's a basic need. So they reclaim this need. And it's basically connected to the idea of their need to be and belong. So it's not only to be connected with others or to be communicating with others, it's also about creating your sense of belonging to a large community, which in fact it's also connected with citizenship, the idea of citizenship, of belonging to a wider community or wider communities. Another funny aspect is that digital identity, it's we have to speak in them about them in plural. So digital identities, because they tend to have multiple faces and multiple presentations depending on the setting. So it's not only about the difference between school environments or video games or so on, but also they can be changing and fluid and dynamic between different social media. And also depending on the goal of their participation in that specific context, like communicating or playing or consuming contents, digital contents, like watching videos and so on. Or also how do they build their identities based on differential access to contents, which is quite interesting, and it's connected with their privacy strategies that Eva was also mentioning. That personally I was really impressed, because I think that their strategies sometimes are much more sophisticated than the strategies that adults tend to have. We also found some differences between the experience of children and adolescents. Of course, there's a differential factor, which is having or not having their own personal smartphone, their own mobile phone, and also this depends on their maturity and their access to connectivity and devices, but also adult supervision and the kind of activities that they are using internet. So I will be back to these differences in terms of how they're framing their demands. So what were the expectations of the digital charter? But one thing that it was quite common for both ages, so for both group ages, it was the right to decide on their own image, or the self-image. And this emerged with quite intensity. And in English, there's this term named sharenting, which is this tendency of parents to be sharing every single minute of their children's lives. And not so long ago, I was reading a report, and it was saying when children have the age of 3 at the moment, the average image that are circulating in the internet of them is 1,500. And if we do the maths, this means more than one picture a day. Imagine that someone is reporting every day at least one picture of your life, of your achievements, of your first words, of your first macaroni, of your first day in the school, and so on and so forth. So it's true that we have a complex setting and the digital economy, and that we have surveillance capitalism, and we have all these corporations, that are pushing forward the attention economy. But we are also part of the problem. I mean the adults that we are, accompanying these children. And this is something that cannot be, of course, it can be included in the strong legal frameworks, but I think there's a matter of digital culture that we also need to develop along with strong legal frameworks, because it's a matter of respect and it's a matter of acknowledging their rights. So this is why I found really useful all your introduction, Eva, to these different legal frameworks, right? So sharenting, it's a very big concern for them, and it was kind of a surprise, because parents tend to be and educators tend to be worried about cyberbullying and things like that, and they are also concerned about this. But one of the main concerns was sharenting to them. And another difference that we found, and I think that it's also kind of worrying to some extent, it's the gender differences. Or genders differences, I would say. So the experience for boys and girls is quite different in terms of protection, in terms of security, in terms of fears, in terms of the potential the potential attacks you can experience, but also if we are talking about LGBTQ collectives. So it's not only a matter of binary gender, it's also a matter of who is more vulnerable in the internet. And this takes me to the aspect of inequalities, that it's also, as Maria was saying, I'm a sociologist, so I have by default, my perspective also tends to look to inequalities. And what we have found in all our research, and so in this pilot and other exercises, is that, for instance, if we focus in screen time, what we find is that children and adolescents coming from less favored or less wealthy environments, they are on average 2 more hours connected every day than their privileged counterparts. Okay. And the thing is not about the time that they are connected, it's that all this time they are being unsupervised. And probably they are not even having parental control tools, and so on and so forth. So the context and the capacity of supervision, but not only invisible supervision and empowerment, which is kind of the combination that the recent studies are finding that it's like the best way to proceed, which is, okay, we are putting limits to their digital experience, but we are explaining why, and we are taking them through these limits, and we are explaining the context, we are offering meaning for what they are experiencing online, and most and foremost, we are offering trust spaces, protected spaces where we can communicate, where we can share our doubts, and where we can build strategies together, because this is about teamwork. It's not only about despotic supervision. And if we take very seriously this idea of putting their rights at the center, the right of being heard and so on, this is what we need to do. So more of the challenges beyond socioeconomic factors is that, again, I was saying at the beginning that we are educating a lot, or we are trying to educate a lot, counting the screen time. And it's not a matter of quantity of hours, it's a matter of quality of the content and the quality of the activities that they are carrying out. For instance, there's a very, very huge difference between being active and being passive in social media. And it's very, very different when your identity only comes from the digital social validation that you have. Then it's quite critical. Then it's when, if you are facing mental health issues, you will feel even worse after, I don't know how many hours in Instagram, okay? But if you have many different sources of identity, if you have other contexts to contrast, if your self-esteem also comes from your basketball team, from your school mates, from your dancing lessons, from, you know, then your identity is built on many, many different pillars, and then every pillar by default is less important. The other challenge that I think that we are facing is that we are not really understanding. So we have a very limited perspective on risks and opportunities. And I really like to mention here the work of Carlos Colari and their work on transmedia literacy and self-learning processes, because it's not only about communication or leisure, it's also about learning to deal with tones of information, so digital literacy, media literacy, content creation, critical thinking, and so on and so forth, right? So it's not a digital environment, so it's as complex as the analog environment. So it's a continuum between the analog and the digital, and everything that concerns us in the analog setting, so in the traditional settings, has to concern us in this digital. And I think I will leave it here, because I think it's interesting that we have time for discussion. But before I close my presentation, I would like to recall a sentence by Neil Postman, which in 1982, he was writing a book entitled Disappearance of Childhood. And the quote says as follows, said, "Children are the living messages we send to a time that we will not see." So maybe I think it's time that we reconsider, that we rethink, and that we put a big effort into deciding which is the living message that we want to send to this time that we are not foreseeing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arroyo. What you were sharing was very interesting. So let's say we must not focus so much on the hours a day that our children spend, like for us, for like normal parents, but instead on the quality of the contents they are there for. So thank you so much for the presentation. Now it's the time for the conversation, and at this point I want to invite and introduce Mr. Albert Royo to take it from here. Mr. Royo is a political scientist who has always been involved in the fields of public affairs, government communications, and international relations. He's mainly focused on civic tech, public diplomacy, and EU affairs. And he's behind the organization of this series of live sessions on digital rights and responsibilities. So, Mr. Royo, thank you so much for all your work and for putting together this set of live sessions, which contribute so much to the global debate on digital rights. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you so much to the two speakers. It's been very, very interesting, all the contributions that they've done. We have already received a couple of questions, but maybe I would offer Eva the possibility to react to Liliana's presentation, and then I'll put these two questions and share them to you. Please, Dr. Lievens.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Liliana. I very much enjoyed listening to your presentation. And just like you mentioned, I recognized a lot of what you were saying. Also, when we did our research with those 83 children between the ages of 9 to 12, we found them so eager to contribute. And I think this is very much related to how we think about this right to be heard. It's a right that is included in a human rights document that asks us, everyone, decision makers, but also we as researchers, to listen to children. And this is sometimes really done in a sort of tokenistic way. So not really with the intention to do something with the results afterwards. And I think this is something that we also experienced. Children, they want to be taken seriously. They really have very clear ideas about how they grow up with these technologies. They, like you mentioned, they often have very sophisticated strategies to deal with certain activities online, with switching from several accounts that may present several of those identities that you also refer to. They think about who is their audience and what they want this audience to see. Also, this idea of self-image, this was also something that even with these children between 9 and 12, this was very, very clear that they know how they want to be perceived and they want to have control over this. And so I think this was very, this really resonated with me because we had exactly the same experiences. So with us, it was children in Flanders. With you, it was children in Spain. But somehow, this is very, very similar. So I think, like you said, we should not underestimate how they can contribute to how adults think that they live these experiences with technology. And I think also for policymakers and regulators, this is extremely important.
Thank you so much for this answer. In fact, you have already answered to the first question coming from Nuria, how we can somehow enshrine this need to involve, engage children in, let's say, the drafting of this legal text, and how we can truly, engage them and take them into account. I don't know, Liliana, maybe you would like to add something on this before we pass to the next question.
Yeah, basically, I think that they've explained it really well. But the thing is that in order to, instead of assuming that they are too young or too unexperienced to participate, I think it's assuming that they are that they are main characters of their own lives, and they have opinions and they have experiences. And I think that it's a matter of learning to ask first and judge after. I think that that's one of the key, that's one of the key advices that, or one of the lessons learned after all the fieldwork I've been carrying with children and adolescents. Yes.
Great. So we have two questions, and we have just 5 minutes. I will ask you to offer, telegraphic answers if possible. There is one question from Monica for you, Liliana. Some parents, educators, tutors might find themselves not capable of understanding the digital world, and how can this affect their relationship with their children that depend on them? That would be one question. Then second one, to both of you, from Jan, recent statistics show that approximately 60% of parents say they do not currently use parental controls. So children also feel their parents don't have the knowledge to be the ones who decide on their access to digital information, because so many parents are not well educated in this digital world. How to best provide digital education to parents, and how to support parents when their children face things like cyberbullying, for example. So maybe Liliana, you can take the floor now, and then we pass on to Eva.
Yeah, well, first, regarding the digital natives, I'm really happy that this question has been raised, because I think that it's a theory coming from 2001, which is providing like a confusing framework, because talking about digital natives is assuming that they really know what they are doing. And I think there's a difference between, knowing when, knowing how to switch on the light and to understand what's electricity. And I think that with digital natives, this is what it's happening. They know really well how to switch the light, because these platforms and all the companies behind all these devices, they are really, really smart in how to develop devices that you don't even need to know to write your name or to be able to read, in order to use these devices, because you just need one finger. That's one thing. So I really love the research carried out by Sonia Livingston, and there's a report where she suggests that in terms of talking about digital natives, we should talk about digital knaves, so that they are basically using all these tools without fear of losing information or pressing the wrong button and so on. And another concept that has been raised to contrast this digital natives theory of Mark Prensky is digital orphans. So under this assumption that they are empowered with their use, we are leaving them alone. We are leaving them alone, and this connects with the other question. And I think that again, it's another critical aspect, and this can be covered, at least in part, with legal frameworks, like providing spaces for training for families, for educators, and so on. But again, I need to insist that this cannot be an individual fight. It cannot be fought in every single household separately. This is we need a systemic change here. We need to create, develop, train, and empower the concept of digital citizenship. Because it's not, so this digital parenting, it's not only a matter of parents, because it's also a matter of countries. So I think that we really need to advance here in creating this digital culture that we were mentioning before. And of course, we need resources, and we need places where families can go and learn. And this can be maybe orchestrated via the school system and so on. But I think that we have an urgency here.
Good point. Eva, please.
Yes, I fully agree. I think it should really be a priority for policymakers, because what we have, for instance, also seen in research projects that we have been involved in, that has in which we have created tools for parents, is that very often you only reach the parents who are already interested, who are already talking to their children about digital technologies. Also, when this happens through the school, for instance, these parent evenings with information about digital technologies, it's only the parents who are already interested who come to these kinds of initiatives. So I think the hard to reach parents should really be a priority. And I think it's a difficult question, how to do it. I think it should really be a joint responsibility, yes, involving the schools, but also, for instance, involving media, involving popular programs on television that might reach parents that would otherwise not be reached. But I fully agree, it's a very big challenge.
Thank you so much, Eva. And with the challenge, I pass the floor now to Maria Galindo to offer some final remarks. Please, Maria.
Thank you so much. It's been an extremely interesting conversation, not just to, like, I think the audience, because we are all in the digital, you know, working in digital, but also as persons, as part of this digital society that we are building. So I think that we summed up very well what we were talking about in this last conversation between Mr. Arroyo, Dr. Arroyo, and Dr. Lievens. But I'd like to just make some very quick remarks on what was discussed here today. So we have children that are growing up in the digital society. Like we have come to the digital society, and they are born and raised with these digital tools. So we must make sure that opportunities and benefits are also leveraged with the risks that all this takes for children when going online. So it is our duty to work to make it a positive impact for children and for technology, also in the field of digital rights. So how do we promote these human rights for children in the digital scene? I'm very pleased and very glad that from Catalonia, we are doing it rightly. We are working aligned with the development of the OECD, the United Nations, the European Commission, the Council of Europe. So it's very, I think, positive and reinforcing for us as well to continue to work in this field. There's also things that we must still work on further and to make it a policy priority, which is everything related to GDPR, to data privacy, and data regulation, really. So because sometimes I think that it's sometimes very difficult even for us, for adults, to understand the commercial exploitation of our data and what goes online. So it's also very hard for children. So, and Liliana, you were saying that it's not the same, like you can turn on and off the light, right? You can switch on the light, but it doesn't mean you understand what electricity is. So we must really advocate for this. And to do this, we must engage children. They are willing to be heard. So we must really not make their decisions for granted, but we have to actually engage them in the policy making, in the process, and in everything. But we are also facing another thing, which is very much how we educate their environment. So their environment also affects a lot on how their capacity, their digital capacity to face the risks and opportunities of going online. So this is very much related to how we approach and develop this digital culture, the digital society, and the digital citizenship. So all in all, it's a huge part and endeavor that we have, digital rights for children and how we approach this with adolescents and with children, but it's part of the bigger picture, which is our digital society. I want to thank you so much, everyone who has been here today, all the attendees. Dr. Lievens, it's been a great pleasure to have you here. Dr. Arroyo, thank you so much for your positive also, because you always put on the positive side to the question. Albert Arroyo, thank you so much for putting everything up. I want to thank also Joana Barbain, Director General from Digital Society, who is developing all these sessions, with Arnau Serra, who is also here today and making all this possible. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day and see you all hopefully very soon.